Hello, and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and I'm delighted to have back with us one of my favorite authors, Regina Scott, who's going to talk about her new book, Of You Most Glorious. Before we begin, though, I do want to stop and offer this brief commercial message. If you find yourself intrigued by Regina's books, please don't hesitate to either go online to the Poison Pen or give us a call, and we would be happy to hold copies for you to pick up at the store or put them in the mail and send them out to you. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Regina Scott. Hi, Regina.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Let's start a little bit by doing your own backstory. Tell us a little bit about yourself. If I understand correctly, I believe your first work of fiction was the intriguingly titled Mummies at the Lake.
Why, yes, it was. I was in third grade at the time. Yes, it was a story about a family that went camping and found a boat, an abandoned big, boat in the middle of the lake, and there were mummies in it. I mean, that's no reason to try to change genres or anything or jump around,
Well, you were kind of blending genres back then, even before you were officially.
I guess so. I was destined.
Now, you kind of have a background in writing as a business, but you really didn't pursue it as a personal effort for a while. Talk a little bit about, was there someone in particular who pushed you into writing?
Yes, there was. I always wanted to be a writer, my whole life. As soon as I figured out that somebody wrote these wonderful books I was reading, I wanted to be that person writing the stories. But I kind of convinced myself that might be hard, so I probably should do something else and just write on the side. So I had been doing that for quite some time, and my husband and I hadn't been married very long, and he asked me, we were talking about, how do you define yourself? And I said, well, that's easy. I'm a writer. And he said, you're not a writer. You never write. Oh, I was so mad at him. I don't think I talked to him for 2 hours. I was just furious. He was my soulmate and he didn't know who I was, And then I got to thinking about it and I thought, he's right. I can sit here and play around with this story and get bored and go jump over to this one and research that one. And I may never finish anything. So I decided I was going to get serious. And I did. And I sent the book off to publishers and Kensington bought it.
It was kind of happy circumstance because a lot of writers tend to, it's not something that happens overnight, but in your case, it was the right time in the right place. Talk a little bit about writing Regencies back then.
It was definitely the heyday. There is something like 20 different publishers I could have approached at that time. And print runs were 100,000, which is unheard of for just a beginning author or a mid-list author, today. And they were begging for them because they were so popular. And you had to have that feeling of history and that ability to have that historic voice. And apparently I do. And I devoured them. I just adored that kind of book. So when I was trying to decide, you have, like I say, mummies, camping, I have lots of different interests. Which one do I try to break in on? It just seemed like that was the most logical because I loved it so much and I'd read so many and I'd been studying the period because I was so fascinated by it that it just seemed like the right one. And apparently it was because it worked.
For those that are listening in who might not be familiar with it, can you kind of explain a little bit about what a Regency romance is?
A Regency romance, in sort of the strictest sense, some people will say a traditional Regency romance, very much harkens back to the days of Jane Austen and more recently Georgette Hare, and the idea of elegance and elegance in manners, elegance in dress, a time when the touch of a hand was, oh my goodness, and it just, like I say, it was a time when manners and being with each other was so, so important. So it's a fascinating time period. And it's a time when we're on the cusp of so many things. It's the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. It's the cusp of feminism. It's all these things that are coming together, just make it such a rich time to write about.
So you wrote a number of traditional regencies, then you kind of branched into inspirational novels, and then a few years ago you had an idea for a particular character who was a photographer, and that launched your national park series, but you didn't really plan on it being about national parks. That was your editor, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes, my editor at Revell said, you know, I really love this first book, and it's kind of in the history of it's set, you know, on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. And she said, you know, could you do 2 more set in the national parks? I said, oh, twist my arm, twist my arm. So that sort of started the series. The second book, when I was researching the first book about Distance Too Grand, about, you know, the Grand Canyon, I came across this tantalizing little just throw off line in one of the research books that said that the cavalry had ridden to the rescue of Yellowstone. I thought, ooh, that's something I'd like to pull that thread and see where that goes. And so that ended up being a big part of the plot for Nothing Short of Wondrous, which was the second book. But I always knew the third book was going to be Mount Rainier. It had to be Mount Rainier. It's 45, the gates of the park are 45 minutes from my door. So it had to be Mount Rainier.
And I would hazard to say, without being corrected, that it's probably the most personal of the books for you because of your connection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. My father grew up back east in a very small town in the Adirondacks. And he couldn't wait to explore the world. And he ended up in the Air Force being stationed at what is now Joint Base Lewis McChord. And my mom likes to tell the story that he'd been here, he came out in the middle of the winter, and he'd been here for, several weeks already. And of course, here it's gray and it's raining and it's, you know, cold. And he came out one day to this beautiful sunny day, and he looked out and he said, who put that big pile of snow at the end of the runway? That was Rainier. That was his first sight of it. And he loved that mountain. It was just love at first sight for him. He just adored it. And so we were up there. He had us up there hiking, camping, you know, anything up there almost every weekend growing up. So that's my dad's mountain, no doubt.
Well, the book itself, A View Most Glorious, is about Cora Baxter, who basically is given the choice: climb Mount Rainier or marry the man her mother has picked out for her. Can you tell us a little bit about the story?
I was trying to think, okay, so what do I do with Mount Rainier? There are so many different stories you could tell. And I thought, a few years ago when we were up there, the national park was handing out postcards. And on it was a picture of Faye Fuller, the first woman to climb Mount Rainier. And I looked at that and I thought, someday I'm writing that story. I want to write about a woman in the 1800s who climbs Mount Rainier. So I knew Cora was going to climb. So why would a woman climb Mount Rainier, you know, at that time? So it was also a time in Washington State where the women were getting very depressed. We'd had the vote twice, almost 3 times, and lost it. And so there was the suffragette groups here were just, how do we raise awareness? How do we get people to understand, you know, how to get these men to think? And so Cora's suffragette group says, you know, you're a very well-positioned socialite. Everyone knows you. If you climb Mount Rainier, people are going to notice. And if a woman can do it, then why can't she vote? So Cora decides to climb Mount Rainier, and her socialite mother says, all right, I'll allow it. But when you fail, you're coming home and doing what I say, and you're getting married to this guy over here who'll set you up for life, and we won't have to worry about this nonsense anymore.
And her guide is someone who has a particular affinity for the mountain, you could say.
He does, absolutely. Nathan Hardy was grew up in the city of Destiny, as they call Tacoma. And his father was very wealthy, but bad investments. They lost everything. And his family just crumbled. And he ended up just basically walking out of the city with nothing. But he found himself in the process. He ended up living out by the mountain. And I think that also betrays my own feeling. I feel closer to, the universe when I and my Lord and Savior, when I am out among the creation. And he has the same sort of feeling. So he has now found himself. He's centered. He knows who he is. He knows what he wants. And he knows how to climb a mountain.
What I love about all of your books, and especially your most recent one, is how you incorporate so many fascinating historical details into the story. On a broad scale, I think with these books, you kind of shatter the myth that women back in history really only had two roles, wife or mother. Cora actually has gone to college. She actually works in the bank, and she's doing things that many people would think women back in the 1880s, 1890s would not think possible. But these are actually real, you use real historical precedents for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There were, I believe, 2 women in the first class at the Puget Sound University, as it was called then. But there was only 7 or 8 of them in the first class. So 2 of them being women, that's pretty good odds. So yes, there was a precedent for that and all along the way. But like you say, it was still sort of interesting. Faye Fuller, the woman that was the first woman to climb, she was a reporter. She was one of the first harbor masters. So she was, and she had a group of women, and they did calisthenics and rifle drills. So not exactly what you think of young ladies during the late 1800s.
And climbing the mountain, I mean, if you're not familiar with it, it doesn't sound like that big a deal. I mean, you think it's just like a day trip or you're just going along a path, but it was really quite an undertaking, and it could be quite dangerous, as you write about in the book. What I loved was how you kind of showed the preparation needed when Cora goes off to purchase her supplies at, I think it was Dickerson's was the name.
Dickinson's, yeah.
Yeah, and all the equipment that was needed. Talk a little bit about mountain climbing back then.
What actually surprised me was how many people just did it. Just, oh, look, we're up here. Let's climb a mountain. It was, because, today it's months of preparation, and it's, training at altitude, and it's, practicing going up and down, and carrying a pack if you've never carried a pack before, and all these different things. And back then they didn't so much. It's amazing to me there weren't more casualties by the number of people that said, wow, let's go climb that thing, and had very little. Of course, a lot of them were farmers, or they rode horseback, or they were in good physical fitness. They were fit. But again, you're climbing at altitude. It's not easy on anybody's body. So it surprised me really how little equipment they used. And the fact that back then, now, of course, everybody's roped together, right? In that, no, you didn't rope people together. That would be dangerous. Someone might fall and suck them all in. No, we don't want to do that. So there were just different thoughts on how that should work. And and climbing in skirts, long skirts, that just, think about that. Think about trying to do that. That's just crazy.
It's like, I guess that quote attributed to Ginger Rogers, women had to do everything that Fred did, but backwards in heels. And in this case, you talk a little bit about how she had to get some bloomers from a friend, because, I mean, you really couldn't be that, you didn't have the movement you needed if you were wearing all these petticoats and skirts, and it could be dangerous.
Exactly, exactly. And like I could have tried to give her that opportunity to climb in skirts, but since I knew Faye Fuller had done it in bloomers, I figured I'd given Cora bloomers too. I'm going to at least give her that advantage.
Mhm. Let's go back a little bit to women's suffrage, because I found that fascinating in your book, especially since we just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment.
Mhm.
Um, Women in the West really, in some cases, were a little bit more equal, I guess is the term, with men than women in the East Coast, maybe because of they were farmers, they were ranchers,
Right.
there were things that had to be done and they couldn't wait for men to do it. So can you talk a little bit about the voting process and the march to get the vote in the West?
Well, some states like Wyoming had it very early. Um,
1860s, I think, or something
yes,
like that.
they were much far ahead of the rest of the country. Washington tried to be. They had the idea. Pardon me.
Mhm.
Um, but the first time it came up, which I believe was actually like very early 1850s, and it was defeated by one vote, and the only reason it was defeated at that time was the gentleman, as legend goes, the gentleman who said no, his wife was Native American, and they did not specifically say she got the vote. He was afraid it would only be white women who got the vote, and so he said, no, if you won't let my wife vote, nobody's gonna vote. You know. Um, Later we, goodness, John, I don't know what this is.
No,
Oh,
that's okay. It's, you need
a
a
little
moment?
a little bit later on, they voted again
Mhm.
and gave women the right to vote. And a year or so later, a group challenged it in court, and the the territory Supreme Court said, well, the law doesn't specifically say giving the woman the right to vote. It's one thing in a bigger law. They didn't know what they were doing, the legislatures. They voted on this by accident, so throw it out, no voting. So things like that had happened several times. And when it came time to become a state, um, they were convinced that if they gave the women the right to vote, the rest of the country wouldn't let them be a state.
Wow.
So they didn't put it forward. So women, it was a rocky road. We still got it a few years ahead of the rest of the country,
Mhm.
but but it was a long and rocky road for us too.
Um, Kind of tangential to that, can we talk a little bit about how you do your research for books? Because there are a lot of historical details. Do you go through like period diaries and letters? Do you go to archives? I know you probably visited these locations, maybe not recently because of the pandemic and things, but talk about your research process and what did you discover while researching A View Most Glorious that surprised you the most?
Well, my goodness. Um, I was so excited to research this. Like you say, I go to museums. If there are hands-on museums, all the better. We have a wonderful Pioneer Farm Museum out in Eatonville where you can milk the cow, you can scrape the cinnamon over the scraper you can do all these things. And it's wonderful hands-on kinds of research. And I love that. That's my favorite kind if I can get it. And then I do look for period sources, however possible I can have them. And I was so excited to research this book because we have the Washington State History Society has their archives right here in Tacoma. And the Tacoma Public Library has a room dedicated to the history of the area. And they have old newspapers and all these and photographs and, playbills and all these things. Yeah, pandemic, they're all closed. So that was a little disappointing. But I just bless the different universities and places who have digitized some of these older manuscripts and things. And of all places, the University of Wisconsin had digitized the first sort of tourist guide to Mount Rainier. It had been published the same month and year My Heroine Makes Her Climb. So it was invaluable to us. Here's where you stop on the way. Here's how many beds they have. Here's the path you walk. Here's how you get, if you're going to climb to the top of the mountain, here's the best way to get there. And then at the back, for a fiction writer, just gold mine, all these ads for places. Go to Dickinson's to get your climbing gear. Go here to have your photographs developed when you get back. It was gold.
I noticed when I was reading the book, and this surprised me, that we think today how names have meanings and they can be changed. Apparently there was some controversy about Mount Rainier, and there were groups that had one name and others that thought a different one was appropriate. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That was one of the things that surprised me. Growing up here, I've always heard Mount Rainier. I don't remember ever being taught. I went through elementary school here in the Tacoma area, and I don't ever remember being taught that it was ever called Mount Tacoma. But apparently, right just before it was made a national park, it was a huge controversy. People literally came to blows over which name it ought to be. In the Chicago World's Fair, just shortly after my heroine Mixer Klein, they had, the Washington State at that time had their own like pavilion, right, or whatever. And they had a big map of the state up there. And somebody, I forget which one it was, somebody put whatever they did, one put, either put Mount Rainier or Mount Tacoma on it. And someone walked in and went, "What?" And they literally started punching each other because they were so mad, and they had to take it off the wall and move it out of sight because it was upsetting people so much. So I had no idea that this was such a thing. And apparently Tacoma petitioned the Washington State Legislature, who petitioned the federal legislature, trying to get the name officially changed to Tacoma, because that would make it's better for marketing, right? Tacoma, just like the city. But the board of geographic names saying, no, there's no precedent for this. There's no reason for this. So there was all kinds of stories put out. In fact, at one point, there was a whole report put out that the people who wanted it to be Mount Tacoma Mount Rainier had taken cases of Rainier beer and gotten the geographic names people drunk. And that's why they came up with the wrong name. And it was like, oh my word. So it was, who would have thought? I never heard the controversy. So I did try and weave that through. Nobody comes to blows, but at various points in the book, people either call it Mount Tacoma and Mount Rainier, and somebody goes, wait, what? Whichever way.
Why do you think national parks are kind of having a renaissance? I mean, you've done this series around it. There's been several other books that come in. What is it about national parks that are particularly speaking to you as a writer and to the general public, do you think?
I think it's a chance to get in touch with our history. It's a chance to get in touch with our environment, and those two things combined. And right now, sunshine, fresh air, and a green space is not a bad thing. So I think all those things combined, at least for me personally, all those things combined to make them such attractive places, and such places that you long to go.
Now, you've written more than 50 books, I believe, to your credit. As you look back at your career, what advice would you give yourself if you were just starting out now? What would you tell yourself?
Don't be afraid to take risks. I thought of that a number of times. There were moments, there was even a moment early on when my publisher said, I think you could move up to bigger books. I don't think you have to do these traditional Regencies. I think you could be single title. And I said, oh no, I'm not ready for that. And so it was, I think I took things too carefully. I think I could have written bigger books, better books. Even the books I had maybe would have had even more punch if I'd been willing to take a few more risks.
Let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about what was on your own summer reading list this year, because I love hearing what authors are reading.
I am late to the game. I have known the author Sherry Cobb South for decades, literally. But I had never really started her John Pickett historical mystery series. And I did, and I got hooked. I'm finishing up number 10 tonight, and number 11's on the horizon. I just love them. And historical mystery is one of my favorite things to read when I'm not reading historical romance. I love historical mysteries. I love steampunk too, but so those are usually high on my list. I'm one of those writers. I can't read a book if I'm in the middle of writing one. I think I invest too much in the characters both ways. And so all of a sudden, whoever I'm writing starts looking a little bit like the one I was reading about. So I have to be really careful. So I wait until a draft is done and put away, and then my reward is I get to read.
Great. Have you ever thought about doing a historical mystery?
I have. I've played around with it a couple times. So far, my agent and I have got interest, but not a publisher yet. So maybe someday.
What is the Blue Stocking League, and how does it apply to you?
The Blue Stocking League is a group of authors who kind of banded together to support each other and encourage each other. Some people have ended up deciding they're ready to retire, so that's cool. Others of us have gone on to found a group on Facebook called Lady Catherine Salon, where we talk about all things Regency all the time. And we have lots of traditional authors come in and talk about what they're writing and where their books are and their research, very similar to the conversation we're having, John, about where they've been and where they're going and what they found that got them excited and things like that. So it's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it.
So they can find this on Facebook?
Yes, they can.
What's next for you as an author?
I am going back to my beloved Regency. I have a series starting in January about three sisters and a friend, 4 young ladies who vow that they are going to be married by harvest one way or the other. And of course, that ends up causing all kinds of issues as they try to make this happen.
Do we know a publisher, or do you not want to disclose that at this time?
Not at this time.
Okay, that's certainly fair. But January, we can look for something new.
Yes.
And if readers want to find out more about you and your books, is your website the best place?
Yes, it is. reginascott.com. All kinds of information, and information not just on the books, but things about the Regency that I found over the years.
Well, that's great. So we've been chatting with Regina Scott about, I don't know why I used we, now I suddenly think of myself as like Victoria.
The royal we, John, that's just right.
About your National Park series. The latest one is A View Most Glorious. It's really a wonderful book for anyone who loves historical fiction, historical stories. There's a little bit of romance to it. I want to thank you as a reader for the series. It's been terrific visiting places we may not have been able to get to. Any last words for readers out there?
Just go out and find your own view most glorious.
That's wonderful. Thank you again, Regina, for taking time to share your thoughts about books and writing and everything else.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, John.
And thank you for tuning in to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen. In case I lose you, because I tend to click on things, and that's wonderful news about the books. So you're doing another series?
I am, but they're self-published, John.
So that's all right.
I'm enjoying being able to do my own thing.
We call it independently published.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah. So, January. Is that the one that's going to be available through Spark, Ingram Spark?
That's my plan. Yeah, that is my plan.
If you can, I could see if Booklist could be interested.
I don't know if I might with this one. Most of the time I'm not so far in advance for them. That's the only thing.
I know they're already like scheduling January titles and things like that. So And it's certainly up to you, but if you want to send me information, I can sound out the editor and see what she thinks. I think the primary criteria they use is libraries have to be able to order it. So as long as it's available through Ingram, that's certainly great. Definitely see what we can do to get it at the Poison Pen. And these are more traditional Regency.
They are.
That's great.
They are. I'm having fun with them. I actually did a series, Fortune's Brides, and that's ended up being like the best selling thing I ever wrote. So I'm doing the children of one of the people in that series and moving it up a little bit ahead. So
that's wonderful. Was that one of your zebra traditional Regency stories?
No, it was self-published. It was one of the independent published ones. So I have my own imprint, Edwards and Williams, and it's just some of them go. I am shocked by how many copies get sold in a nice way. You know?
Yeah, no, it's really a different world from 20 years or so ago. I know another author who's hybrid, I guess, and does both traditional and Indian. She sells, numbers that surprise me, but I guess it's standard for that. I guess there's a lot of readers out there, which is great.
I am very enheartened by how many readers still new ones even love the traditional Regencies.
Yeah.
The Unflappable Miss Fairchild, my very first one. Mm-hmm. I did one of those BookBub things, and put it for free, and just to see what would happen. And 72,000 downloads, John.
Oh my God.
I couldn't believe it. And then they started reading all the others. It was just unreal. And years ago, Kensington closed their line because they said all the readers had died. Well, no, they didn't. And a friend of mine pointed, and I thought, this book's been out for 20 years. Who's reading it? And a friend of mine said, the people who are reading it are people who were 6 years old when it was published. So, wow, I just love it. I just think it's wonderful.
That's great. Well, also, there's kind of been this whole Regency renaissance too with Julia Quinn and the Bridgertons and all that. So it seems to be shifting back that direction. Well, I could not be more thrilled for you. That's terrific.
Thank you.
And
amazing. It's just amazing to me. I don't know how this all happens, but it's wonderful.
And whatever I can do to help with the new series, I would be more than happy.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate all. You have been like the best little ray of sunshine in my world for a long time. So thank you.
That's the last thing on earth most people would call me, but it's nice of you to say.
Truly
I loved your books. I love the National Park series. I actually co-authored a book on the suffragists.
Did you? Yeah. Oh, I wish I'd seen that. I would love to have read that.
With Shelley Mosley, who was a very dear friend and fellow librarian who passed away a few.
I remember Shelley. She used to come to your teas.
Yeah, she did. She also wrote romances. That was her passion. And like 10, 15 years, I can't even remember. She worked with a publisher, Scarecrow Press, who's really small and did academic library reference books. And she said, we have to write this book about suffragists. And I'm like, what? I knew Susan B. Anthony, but that was about it. But that was her passion. And we spent like a year working on that book. And honest to God, I learned more about those women than I ever thought possible.
I bet. Is it still available?
Let me see. I may have a few copies. I would be happy to send one on to you if I can find an extra one.
Oh, that or I'll go buy it somewhere.
It might. It was called the Suffragists in Literature for Youth. And it was by Shelley Mosley and myself. And it was kind of a guide to the resources, which is why I found your latest book just fascinating. But that was Shelley's passion. And just between us, we spent a year working on it and made absolutely no money.
Oh.
We sold probably like 75 copies to libraries or something. But she was happy. That was like the book of her heart. So
there you are. She wanted to make sure that history was captured.
Yeah.
So that people could appreciate it. That's wonderful.
Yeah, so I just remember suffragists and Shelley, and now you.
There you are. Yes. No, I have a friend that's very much that she studied that. And so I picked her brain a lot.
And there have been like a lot of stuff that come out in the last couple of years just because of the centennial.
Yes,
Like
that
that.
was very helpful. Yes, absolutely. Oh,
Well, it's been just delightful chatting with you, Regina.
you too. It always is.
And I hope you have a lovely holiday if I don't hear from you before then.
You too.
And if you should be inclined or you think it'll be helpful, feel free to send that information about your upcoming books
Okay.
and your other books that are coming back into print, I guess is the term. And I can see what I can do to get them into the bookstore.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. Always lovely talking to you.
You too. Take care, John.
You too. Stay safe.
You too.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.